2/3 of Canadians believe their country is deeply broken. And this statistic paints a stark picture of a nation grappling with widespread dissatisfaction. Canada's economy is experiencing a decline in productivity, with business investment shrinking and government spending increasing. This trend is leading to a lack of high-paying jobs outside of resource extraction, and many citizens are feeling increasingly hopeless about their future, unless some urgent reforms are made to address systemic issues. But how does this economic shift compare to other developed nations? And what are the long-term implications for Canada's global competitiveness? Well, let's get straight to it. The first thing we have to talk about is the housing crisis. At the heart of Canada's economic turmoil lies a housing crisis of unprecedented proportions. In the past decade alone, the value of an average Canadian home has more than doubled, transforming the nation's housing market into one of the least affordable in the world. This rapid escalation in prices has far-reaching consequences, affecting not only homeowners and prospective buyers, but also renters and the broader economy. And to really understand just how bad this is, we need to talk about it in a global context. While many developed nations face housing pressures, Canada's situation stands out due to a unique combination of factors. Okay, let's talk about these. First of all, high immigration rates, which add significant demand to the housing market, coupled with notoriously slow housing development approvals. And honestly, those things have combined to make a perfect storm of housing scarcity and skyrocketing prices. You might think, for example, well, Canada's got a lot of room. It's not really just that easy. The impact of this crisis is particularly acute in major urban centers. For example, in Toronto, residents are reportedly spending an astonishing 120% of their income on rent, which is wild. And this statistic not only highlights the extreme cost burden faced by renters, but also raises questions about the sustainability of such a housing market. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, the situation for potential homeowners is equally dire, with households needing to earn at least $250,000 annually to qualify for a mortgage. To qualify. That's a lot of money, and this paints a grim picture of housing affordability in Canada's largest cities. However, the repercussions of this crisis extend far beyond urban centers, affecting Canadians across various demographics and regions. And young Canadians in particular are bearing the brunt of this economic strain. Many have abandoned the hope of homeownership entirely, faced with the dual challenges of skyrocketing prices and stagnant wages. It's kind of hard to afford a home if you're not earning more money, right? And this shift in expectations represents a significant departure from the traditional Canadian dream of homeownership and financial stability. The housing crisis is further exacerbated by a severe shortage of rental properties. Canada's rental vacancy rate has plummeted to an all-time low of 1.5%, leading to fierce competition for available units. It's not uncommon for hundreds of applications to flood in for each available rental property, creating a highly competitive and often discouraging environment for those that are seeking housing. This scarcity of affordable housing options has led to some troubling trends. A growing number of young Canadians are now relying on financial support from their parents to afford home purchases. And according to recent data, 72% of parents are willing to assist their children with an average contribution of $145,000 each. While this parental support may provide a lifeline for some, it also highlights the growing generational wealth gap and the increasing difficulty for achieving financial independence for younger Canadians. And the root causes of Canada's housing crisis are complex and multifaceted. One significant factor is the lack of competition in the housing market, driven in part by local governments' reluctance to allow new developments. This hesitancy has led to inflated property prices and a shortage of available housing stock. And the scale of this shortage is absolutely mind-blowing. A report by CIBC estimates that Canada needs to build 5 million more homes by 2030 to achieve housing affordability targets. But developers are warning that meeting this goal is pretty much impossible, given the current constraints and approval processes. And there's something else we really need to talk about: economic strain, including debt, inflation, and stagnation. The housing crisis in Canada is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the economic challenges facing the nation. A closer examination reveals a troubling trifecta of economic strain: mounting household debt, persistent inflation, and economic stagnation. These interconnected issues are eroding the financial stability of Canadians and calling into question the long-held belief in Canada's economic resilience. Canada now holds the dubious distinction of having the highest household debt among G7 countries. This debt burden is intrinsically linked to the housing crisis and stagnant wages, creating a perfect storm of financial pressure for Canadian families. The ratio of household debt to disposable income has reached alarming levels, with Canadians owing $1.85 for every dollar of disposable income. That's almost a 2-to-1 ratio. And this precarious financial position leaves many households vulnerable to economic shocks and interest rate fluctuations. And let's be honest, the strain of servicing this debt has intensified in recent years. For example, interest payments for households have reached their highest level in 12 years as a percentage of disposable income. This increasing burden is forcing many Canadians to allocate a larger portion of their income to debt repayment, leaving less for savings, investments, and discretionary spending. Compounding the debt crisis is the persistent issue of inflation, which has been outpacing wage growth. While inflation is a global phenomenon, its impact on Canadians has been particularly severe. Food prices, for instance, have risen by over 10% since 2022, significantly outstripping wage increases. This inflationary pressure is not limited to groceries. It extends to various sectors of the economy, including housing, transportation, and telecommunications. The cost of living in Canada has become increasingly burdensome, with everyday expenses consuming an ever larger share of household budgets. Cell phone charges in Canada, for example, are among the highest in the developed world, further straining family finances. This high cost of living is not merely an inconvenience, it's reshaping the economic landscape of the country and altering the lifestyle expectations of its citizens. To understand the root causes of these economic pressures, we have to examine the structural issues within the Canadian economy. One significant factor is the lack of competition in key industries. The grocery sector, for example, is a great example of where this really can be found, with a few dominant companies controlling nearly 80% of the market share. 80%. This oligopolistic structure allows for price manipulation and reduces incentives for innovation and efficiency, which ultimately leads to higher costs for consumers. And there's another issue. A huge concerning trend is the decline in Canada's economic productivity since the year 2019. This decline is particularly evident in business investment, especially in machinery and equipment. The reluctance of businesses to invest in productivity-enhancing technologies and processes has contributed to stagnant wages and lower living standards. This productivity gap not only affects current economic conditions, but also threatens Canada's long-term competitiveness in the global market. And of course, we have to talk about healthcare and social services. Canada's healthcare system, once a source of national pride and a defining feature of Canada's identity, is now facing unprecedented challenges that threaten its very foundations. The stark contrast between its former status and current state serves as a poignant illustration of the broader economic and social pressures plaguing the country. For decades, Canada's universal healthcare system stood as a model for other nations, promising equitable access to medical care for all citizens. However, recent data paints a troubling picture of a system under immense strain. The most alarming statistic reveals that only 37% of Canadians believe they would receive adequate care in emergencies. And this erosion of trust in a fundamental public service is symptomatic of deeper systemic issues that have been brewing for years. When compared to countries with similar healthcare models, Canada's performance is increasingly falling short. Patients in Canada often endure longer waits for both emergency and elective procedures than their counterparts in many European countries with comparable systems. This disparity becomes even more striking when considering that Canadians spend more on healthcare than citizens of any European country, yet face poorer outcomes and reduced accessibility. The factors contributing to this decline are multifaceted and deeply rooted. Chronic underfunding has left the healthcare system ill-equipped to handle the growing demands of an aging population. And as the demographic shift continues, with a larger proportion of Canadians entering their senior years, the strain on healthcare resources intensifies. This pressure is further exacerbated by a shortage of medical professionals, leading to overcrowded emergency rooms and extended wait times for essential services. And the COVID-19 pandemic has served as a stark revealer of these systemic weaknesses, pushing an already strained system to its breaking point. Reports of increased fatalities in emergency rooms due to extended wait times have become alarmingly common, highlighting the dire consequences of a healthcare system operating beyond its capacity. And, moreover, the geographic disparities in healthcare access across Canada compound these issues. Rural and remote communities often face significantly greater challenges in accessing timely and quality care compared to urban centers. And this inequity not only undermines the principle of universal healthcare itself, but it also contributes to broader socioeconomic disparities across the country. And the declining quality of healthcare is not merely a matter of public perception. Canada's healthcare system now ranks among the worst in OECD countries, which is a stark fall from its former position as a global leader. This decline is particularly concerning given Canada's relatively high healthcare expenditure, suggesting systemic inefficiencies that go beyond mere funding issues. And the impact of this healthcare crisis extends far beyond the realm of medical care. It's intrinsically linked to the broader economic challenges facing Canada. The strain on the healthcare system contributes to reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, and a diminished quality of life for many Canadians. And of course, people aren't happy about this. And the growing dissatisfaction with healthcare services is part of a larger trend of disillusionment with public institutions, eroding the social contract that's long been a cornerstone of Canadian society. And here's perhaps one of the most serious problems: the widening wealth gap. The widening wealth gap in Canada has become a defining feature of the nation's economic landscape, reshaping social dynamics and challenging long-held notions of equity and opportunity. While income inequality is a global phenomenon, Canada's situation stands out among developed nations, with disparities reaching alarming levels in recent years. And to really grasp the severity of this issue, we need to compare it with other nations, okay? Canada's income inequality has surpassed that of many other developed countries, including several European nations with similar social welfare systems. And this disparity becomes even more striking when considering Canada's reputation for social progressivism and economic stability. The stark reality of Canada's wealth distribution is revealed in a single jarring statistic. The top 20% of Canadians now hold over 2/3 of the country's net worth, while the bottom 40% hold a mere 2.7%. And this concentration of wealth at the top echelons of society represents a significant departure from the more equitable distribution that once characterized the Canadian economy. And this imbalance has far-reaching implications for social mobility, economic stability, and the overall health of Canadian society. The factors contributing to this widening wealth gap are multifaceted and deeply rooted in Canada's economic structure. Stagnant wages, particularly for middle and lower income earners, have failed to keep pace with rising cost of living. And this wage stagnation, coupled with the rapid appreciation of assets like real estate, has created a situation where wealth accumulation is increasingly concentrated among those who already possess significant capital. Uneven economic growth has further exacerbated this trend. While certain sectors of the economy, particularly in technology and finance, have seen substantial growth and high wages, traditional industries have struggled to provide comparable opportunities. This disparity in economic prospects has led to a bifurcation of the workforce, with a growing divide between high-skill, high-wage jobs and lower-paying service sector positions. The long-term implications of this widening wealth gap are profound and far-reaching. Social mobility, long considered a cornerstone of Canadian society, is increasingly under threat. And as wealth becomes more concentrated, the ability for individuals to move up the economic ladder diminishes, potentially creating a more rigid class structure that contradicts Canada's egalitarian ideals. And here's the thing. The perception of inequality among Canadians has intensified dramatically in recent years. A striking 38% of Canadians now view their country as having extreme inequality, more than double the 19% who held this view in 2019. This shift in public opinion reflects a growing awareness of the economic challenges facing the nation. This sentiment is further evidenced by the fact that 58% of Canadians report feeling pushed around in life due to financial pressures. This widespread feeling of economic powerlessness is a troubling indicator of the psychological impact of growing inequality and its potential to erode social cohesion. Experts argue that the concentration of wealth among a small number of families has had far-reaching consequences for the Canadian economy. It stifled innovation, hindered economic dynamism, and created barriers to entry for new businesses and entrepreneurs. This lack of economic diversity and opportunity further entrenches existing wealth disparities, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of inequality. And the top 1% of earners in Canada have seen their wealth increase significantly in recent years, further widening the gap between the ultra-wealthy and the rest of the population. This trend not only impacts current economic conditions, but also threatens to reshape the social fabric of the nation, potentially leading to increased social tensions and political polarization.